What's going on, everybody? It's your boy, Scott Proctor. We're back with another college football primer. I'm here with Brad Everidge, who's been covering college football for 25 years. Brad, it's an exciting time with the college football playoff finally here, ready to kick off this weekend. You ready to talk about it? Let's do it, man.
Let's do it, man. These games take too long to come. That's one thing I'm excited about with this new 12-team model in a couple of years is that we will no longer have the 3-week wait, in between conference championship games and the next, what I would call meaningful games.
No doubt. The buildup is crazy, man. The buildup is insane, but it's finally here. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about this weekend's college football playoff that finally kicks off. I want to start here, man, because these coaches obviously are going to be under, a tight lens. So let's start there. And I want to ask you, Brad, which of these 4 coaches is under the most pressure here this weekend moving forward to the college football playoff, do you think?
To me, this is a pretty easy one. I think it's Ryan Day. Yeah. You could certainly look at Jim Harbaugh and say, okay, there's pressure probably to win this game. Given the way they got blown out in last year's semifinal, at the very least, you need to look good this time, right? You could say there's pressure on Kirby Smart because maybe somewhere in his mind he's chasing Nick Saban, and this is the next step toward getting his program to that spot. But I don't buy too much in any of that. The pressure is on Ryan Day. And it's not just because his last game was a blowout loss against Michigan. To me, it's a lot bigger than this. There are Ohio State fans, a lot of them, who are questioning whether he's the right guy for the job. Yep. Is he a good enough coach to be able to help them eventually win a national championship or two? And that's obviously judged by how you play, how your teams play in the biggest games. And let's look at the bigger picture. It's not just that 2 years in a row they've been blown out by Michigan teams that reach the college football playoff. So that's the type of team you're being judged against. But go back to the last game they played in the COVID season of 2020. And I realize that was a messed up season, especially for Big Ten teams. But the last game they played, they were blown off the field by Alabama in the national championship game. Then you had the Michigan game last year, the Michigan game this year. If they were to get blown out by Georgia, like not be competitive, all of a sudden that's 4 games in a row against playoff caliber teams that you've been a no-show and haven't even had a chance to win if it were to happen again. That's the type of thing that I think really could get somebody like Ryan Day in hot water, big time hot water going into next year. So I would say because of that, all the pressure is on him.
No doubt about it. And you mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, Brad, when you were talking about Ryan Day and some of the pressure he's feeling from Buckeye fans and the fact that they might be getting flashbacks to John Cooper. A loss here and an embarrassing loss here and the playoff again, ending the season, a blowout loss to a playoff team. That would not be a good look. That would not help in that regard. So I have to agree with you there, no doubt.
Yeah, and once again, I'm not saying the pressure is on him to win this game. Sure. There's pressure, a lot of pressure to be competitive.
No doubt. No doubt about it. Let's continue to talk about this matchup because I think personally it's the most intriguing of the 2 college football playoff matchups. Obviously, Georgia and Ohio State. Going from coaches to the athletes actually on the field. Who do you think is the most important player in this game? Who do you think is going to have the most impact on whether their team wins or loses?
I mean, obviously, you look at the 2 quarterbacks and you'd say, both of them need to play well. Yeah. C.J. Stroud has to play really well, but I also look at Marvin Harrison Jr. and he's a guy who I think, and look, it's not just him. Ohio State's got a lot of talented receivers. They're all going to need to make plays because unlike a lot of games they play in the Big Ten, they're not going to be able to scheme their way open, like where you've got guys, running alone with no defender within 5 yards. Yeah. Georgia's not going to bust. I'm not saying they'll never bust a coverage, but you're not going to see it happen very often. You don't even see it every game out of Georgia. So more than likely, you're talking about receivers having to make catches that are contested, with the DB right there. And a lot of times, guys just having to outmuscle somebody for the ball. And so we're talking about Ohio State receivers needing to show up because a lot of times it's not simply going to be, okay, are you going to be able to get open? It's going to be, can you make a catch while you're covered? Can you win that one-on-one? I think that's the key for them. I mean, on the other side, Stetson Bennett, I could argue, is the most important player in the college football playoff, not because his team needs him to be able to win, but because if he plays well, I don't think anyone has a chance against Georgia. He is that X factor. They can win without him playing his best. But if he does play his best, I think the rest of the roster is so good that Georgia's unbeatable within this college football playoff. And so if he plays 2 good games in a row, this thing's over.
Brett, I'm curious, which of these 2 quarterbacks, and you mentioned both of them, you talked a little bit about both of them there, which of these 2 quarterbacks do you trust more in this big moment? Because obviously, C.J. Stroud has the NFL wide receivers, and Stetson Bennett obviously probably has the better team, the better overall talent around them. But as you mentioned, again, previously on an episode of this primer, either you're going to get a Stetson Bennett that comes out and plays really well, or you might get a Stetson Bennett that comes out there and throws a couple picks and costs their team. Which of these 2 quarterbacks do you kind of trust more in this big spot, in this big moment this weekend?
I actually trust Stetson Bennett more because it's a big spot and because I've seen him consistently play well in big spots the last 2 years. The one that he didn't was the SEC championship game last year when he threw a couple of picks. One was returned for a touchdown, and he kind of looked coming out of that game like he was not the right guy to lead Georgia to a national title. Then he plays lights out in the semifinal against Michigan. Yeah. And after not playing so well in the first 3 quarters in the championship game against Alabama, when the season was on the line, the long-awaited title was on the line, he started making plays in the 4th quarter and was not to be denied. And, you look at this season, and he's had a few games where they were kind of lackluster. Maybe he's had a couple of 2 interception games. He's had a couple more games with a completion percentage under 60. But you look at who they were against, none of them were against teams that were real threats. Every time a game has really been marked as a big game, Stetson Bennett has played well. And I would expect him to play well in this semifinal against Ohio State because he's the guy who's always been doubted, right? He's never good enough. And he sees the NFL ratings and that C.J. Stroud is a probable top 5 pick. Yeah. Nobody's projecting Stetson Bennett as a first-round pick at all. I mean, I don't know if anybody's projecting him as a top 5-round pick. Yeah. And he feeds off of that stuff, and he's played so well in these big games because of it. I would expect him to do it again.
No doubt. Last question before we hop over to this other semifinal matchup, Brad. We talked a lot about Georgia here, and obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to have a lot to say if Ohio State's able to pull off this victory. But what exactly is it going to take for the Buckeyes to pull off, a pretty massive upset and what would be a huge win for Ryan Day in this program?
I think it's going to take the defensive front for Ohio State doing 2 things. 1, slowing down the Georgia running game, and 2, getting pressure on Stetson Bennett. And, as I said before, he's had some games where he's thrown a couple of picks. He's had other games where he wasn't incredibly accurate. And obviously the best way to cause things like that to happen is to put a quarterback under pressure. And so I think that's such a big factor here for Ohio State to be able to make him uncomfortable. I mean, let's not forget, fairly late in the season, Georgia scored 1 touchdown against Kentucky. The next game, midway through the third quarter, they had 1 touchdown against Georgia Tech. Now, once again, those weren't big games. Those weren't the games where, a real gamer is going to be up and ready to prove something. But it just shows that Georgia's offense is capable of being held down and being held down by defenses that aren't quite as talented as Ohio State. So I think if they can do that, if they can consistently put him under pressure, put him in situations where he has to throw the ball, that's the chance that Ohio State has in this game.
Brad, you mentioned a word there that piqued my interest just a bit. And just to get a quick answer before we transition here, just to settle a bit of an office debate that we've been having here recently, you mentioned the word gamer. What does that word mean to you? And how do quarterbacks in particular kind of exemplify that on game day?
To me, that's the guy who saves his best for the biggest moment. I mean, I guess you don't like anyone to save it necessarily. Sure. But a gamer is someone that you can count on his best in the biggest moment. And to me, that's what Stetson Bennett is. And I mean, I guess if you're Stetson Bennett, you don't win the Heisman because you didn't bring that level every single week. So your stats weren't at the level of some other guys. But I'm just telling you, for a guy who may not have as much physical talent as a C.J. Stroud, I trust him because I've just seen him in these positions where I thought Georgia might be vulnerable. Yeah. And in those moments, whatever it is, he flips that switch and all of a sudden his passes are more accurate. He makes those plays out of the pocket that he doesn't necessarily make every single game, but he just always seems to make them when his team needs them.
No doubt about it. I love that. I love that answer from you, Brad. Let's go over to this other matchup though. Michigan versus TCU. Again, if you don't already know, I love the quarterback position. I played quarterback at the collegiate level. I have to start here with the QBs in this matchup as well. Which of these two quarterbacks, J.J. McCarthy, Max Duggan, who was a Heisman finalist, has to play an A-plus game? Because I can honestly see it both ways. Both of these teams really need a big day, I think, from their quarterback to advance. What say you?
In this game, I think it's Duggan. I think similar to what I said about Georgia being able to win without Stetson Bennett playing his best game, I think Michigan can win without McCarthy playing his best game against TCU. They can. Because I think Michigan is capable of establishing a really strong running game without even needing to get the quarterback involved. But even if they do get him involved a little bit, I don't think they need to throw it particularly well. I think Michigan's defense is capable of not shutting TCU completely down, but I think they're capable of holding them under 20. And if they're able to do that, I think, Michigan can generate enough through the running game that McCarthy doesn't have to play well. Now, if he does play well, I like Michigan's chances even better. But I think for TCU to succeed, Duggan needs to play well. Now, I'm not saying that's the only way they can win, because I also think there's a chance that Michigan's offense could be held in check as well. And if that happens, then maybe TCU could win 24-21 without Duggan playing his A-plus game, as you had said. Mm-hmm. But I think if I'm going to pick a side of who's got a better chance of winning without their quarterback playing great, I would say it's Michigan, and that TCU is the team whose quarterback needs to play great.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I kind of look at it a little bit differently, because it's almost as if, at least me personally, I'm expecting Max Duggan to come out and play well, especially early on, coming off the loss in the Big 12 title game. And obviously the loss of Blake Corum is we're going to see how that unfolds. Obviously Donovan Edwards is a hell of a player. He showed that a few weeks ago. And obviously J.J. McCarthy, you mentioned it, he's going to have to probably play a role in the run game as well. And I think he's also going to have to do a little bit of what he had to do against Ohio State and air that ball out in a few times. Because, again, I'm expecting Max Duggan in this TCU offense to, at the very least, be able to move the ball. I don't know if they're going to be able to turn, long drives into touchdowns, but I think J.J. McCarthy is going to have to really play well, using both his legs and his arm.
What you just said, I think, is a key really in both games, and especially for the underdogs, for Ohio State and for TCU, turning long drives into touchdowns.
Yeah.
Where these games are so often won are teams being able to hold the opponent to field goals in the red zone. I know that's true for every big game throughout the season. But this is a situation where I could certainly see that being a major factor in these games, because, look, Ohio State's one of those offenses that you're not going to keep them from getting first downs. They're going to move the ball. And I would say TCU is the same thing.
Yeah.
They've shown their explosiveness enough. The question is, will those big plays, more than likely through the passing game, will those big plays end up in the end zone? Or are they going to get down to the 12-yard line? And at that point, can you get them into the end zone? I think that's the big thing. I see this as a game where Michigan's big plays are more likely to end up in the end zone. And TCU may have to gain the extra critical 10 yards or so down there where the field is compressed. And so I think that is a huge part of this game, especially for TCU, is being able to convert touchdowns once they get in the red zone.
No doubt. It's going to be fascinating, especially with both these teams averaging over 40 points per game on offense. It's going to be fascinating to see, which side of the ball kind of, folds at least. I want to ask about Michigan's coach, obviously Mr. Harbaugh. You had a column on BVM Sports recently ranking the top 10 best active head coaches without a title. Harbaugh came in. Actually, I'm gonna let the people, they got to go read it to see where Harbaugh came in on that list. Talk a little bit about that and what you think a win, particularly in the semifinal and maybe in a national championship, would mean for Harbaugh's legacy.
Yeah, Harbaugh was pretty high on the list. Best coaches in the FBS without a national championship. And I think a win in the playoff, not a win against TCU, but a win of the national championship in the next couple of weeks would be enormous for Jim Harbaugh and how his career is perceived. I think everybody considers him a really good coach. And obviously he's proven himself at both levels, having a brief NFL career, but he had a lot of success in that brief time with the 49ers. And I think what's really missing is that championship. And obviously he has a couple at the Big Ten level. The question is, can you get that national title? Because let me just tell you from my perspective right now, I don't put Jim Harbaugh in the same category as Kirby Smart as a college football head coach. And part of that is because Kirby is coming off of one national championship. Well, in addition, Kirby was a 2nd and 26 away from winning one back in 2017.
Yeah.
And then he finally got his first title last year. And I feel like he's about to get back-to-back this year. And so therefore, I perceive there to be this gap. Like Kirby is maybe closer to Saban than he is to Harbaugh.
I would agree.
But if Harbaugh were to end up winning this thing, that completely changes in my mind, because now you're looking at two guys with Harbaugh, Kirby Smart, who both have one national title.
Yeah.
I would say Harbaugh would have won it with, I'm not saying no talent. He's got some talented guys on his team, but with less talent than what Kirby won it with.
Right.
And
Harbaugh in that scenario, Harbaugh would have the head-to-head win over Kirby as well, and national championship would probably make it.
Yeah, and obviously Kirby beat him last year, so that would balance out. But all of a sudden you start looking at it and it's like, okay, you know what? Harbaugh's done it for longer at the college level, as far as, having coached in multiple places, one of them not easy to win, which is Stanford, and he had success there. Whatever, you put it all together, and all of a sudden, like, I can make a very good argument for Jim Harbaugh being in the same category as Kirby Smart, and that would be that next tier right below Nick Saban. So to me, if Jim Harbaugh were to win this, I think it does a world of good and makes a whole lot of difference in the way that people perceive him. The difference between being looked at as a pretty good coach to being a great coach. Maybe not the absolute elite level right now, but as good as anybody outside of Nick Saban, in my opinion, if he were to win the national championship this season.
No doubt. And it's on the table. It's definitely in the cards.
Let me add one other thing, Scott, about that I think is kind of underplayed right now, which is how much Michigan lost from last year's playoff team. Like, you're only supposed to be able to, and once again, Michigan recruits well, but they don't recruit at the consistent top 5 year after year level that Ohio State does and Georgia does and Alabama does. I expect those teams to lose a lot of talent to the NFL draft and to be able to reload and be great again, possibly a playoff team again the next year. I don't expect Michigan to be able to do that. And I realize it wasn't the strongest schedule. But if he is able to win a national championship after losing all that he lost from last year's team, and this is a mark of a really good coach, to make a difficult decision to change from his starting quarterback from the playoff the year before and replace him with the better player who gave this year's team a better chance to win. And if he's able to do that and win a national championship, I think all of it just speaks volumes for him. And once again, would completely change the perception that a lot of people would have of Jim Harbaugh.
No doubt about it. I mean, that's a great point there at the end about the quarterback swap. I mean, that's a career defining decision that Harbaugh made there. It's paid off massively. And because we all know JJ McCarthy is the better athlete, but it's still a tough decision to make when you're Cade McNamara and you've won big games and you've won that locker room over. That says a lot about Harbaugh, and that it was able to work out and the team was able to, buy into that and keep moving forward and keep winning games. So that's some special stuff, but that's going to do it for us. Brad, thanks so much again for your time. Go check out and we'll be watching the college football playoff this weekend. Should be a lot of fun, but that's going to do it for us. For your boy, Scott Proctor, Brad Edwards, we'll catch you next week.
Thanks for watching. Feel free to check out our other videos and don't forget to smack that subscribe button down below while you're at it. Also, for more great and original content, head right over to bvmsports.com.